Data becomes a useful information source to determine gaps and gains, not to judge. It's important to be more curious than judgmental. Data are only as useful as the conversation around them and the ways in which they honestly can reflect a gradient on a previously agreed upon standard.
What's up, Aspire Leaders? That lovely voice is my special guest, Laura Lipton, and she is an international consultant whose writing, research, keynotes, and seminars focus on effective and innovative instructional practices and on building professional and organizational capacities for enhanced learning. Laura is an author and co-author of numerous publications related to organizational and professional development, and we're going to talk on two specific books today. Just a few days ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to speak to the New Ulm district, and what a fantastic group of educators. It was such an honor to do one of my favorite keynotes called Transformative Mental Health Strategies for Educators. We know today the field of education is extremely demanding, and if we're not careful with our mental health and well-being, well, we can feel a lot of anxiety and burnout. So this keynote was talking about just exploring practices to foster not only resiliency, but also to work on mental health strategies in our daily routines to make sure that we're constructing healthy habits and enhance our capacity. If you're looking for a keynote speaker for your school district or for a conference or event, head over to joshstamper.com/speakers to find a variety of presentation topics to see which one fits best for your event. And of course, there's a form there you could fill out if you're looking to book for a powerful keynote session that'll energize your team, school, or district. All right, I'm excited about this conversation with Laura Lipton. So let's jump in as we're going to talk about learning-focused supervision, how a leader can be a growth agent, and a variety of projects that she's working on, including her book, Groups at Work. Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead, where we will be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. All right, Aspire Leaders and Teach Better family, thank you so much for joining me. I have a fantastic guest with me. I had an opportunity to speak with her previously about her work. She is a wonderful author, brilliant leader. Laura Lipton, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Well, thank you. That's a difficult introduction to live up to. What else?
I know you will live up to it, and even more so. Okay. With that, I would love for you just to share a little bit about yourself, your educational and leadership background.
Sure. Well, I've been in education for quite some time. I got my doctorate and a combined doctorate with Vanderbilt and Fordham University in educational organization and leadership. Worked for a central service agency in New York. They're called BOCES, Board of Cooperative Educational Services, where I really learned to do professional development, learned a lot about adult learning. It was really coming on the scene at that time. And also at the same time, I worked with Art Costa and Bob Garmston. So the whole cognitive thinking skills thrust. So the combination of professional development that was thoughtful and growth oriented really are my roots. I ran the professional development for association of 28 school districts, and through that BOCES. Then in the late 90s, I met Bruce Wellman, and he and I branched out and decided that we would start our own business, our own company, and it's a small publishing and human resource development company, Miravia LLC. So that kind of brings us just about up to date. We have traveled, and I have traveled internationally and had the delight of working with all kinds of educators in various contexts and various settings. And what's interesting is there's so many similarities, and yet there's wonderful, unique differences as well.
All right, so I threw up the link real quick, but I'd love for you just to share kind of what you all work with educators and leaders in regards to your LLC.
We focus on what we call learning-focused practice. So we started with classroom work, actually, in our book, Pathways to Understanding, which were learner-centered classrooms, where really the students and the information were more important than the teacher. The teacher was a facilitator of growth. You know, and it's a knowledge construction kind of a notion, who's doing the most thinking and is doing the most learning. And then we moved that into adult development in one-to-one. And so our next book was about mentoring. And at that time, in the early 2000s, there was a real teacher shortage. And so a lot of new teachers were coming on the scene, and they really needed the support, not simply hand-holding, but they needed someone who empowered them to be lifelong learners. And so we developed a model that really transferred our classroom learning model to the one-to-one adult relationship. Subsequent to that, we took that and we said, there needs to be data in the mix here. It's not just my opinion about good teaching. And so we wrote a book called Data Driven Dialogue, which was then moving us into groups and how to work with groups so that they could use data to improve and not simply to prove. Related to that, then, two kind of almost concurrent publications. The book Groups at Work, which is really about the leader as a group developer. Meetings are to meet, so don't just make it a oral memo. How do you use strategies to get collaboration and to really engage staff for collective efficacy? And then that sort of very connected to that, we went back to the one-to-one notion of supervision that went beyond compliance, and that is learning-focused supervision. And I think we're hoping to sort of focus and concentrate on that for this brief time together.
That's awesome. All right. Well, you're supporting a lot of folks all over the country, and I absolutely love it. I wanted to touch on something that really we haven't talked about a ton. I know, on the Spider Lead podcast, at least lately, and this is fresh in my mind, is more about, teacher feedback, as we're getting back into schools, starting the school year. I mean, obviously, administrators are looking at, the evaluation process, putting things together, getting the paperwork in with their teachers. But yeah. I know that you have a very unique lens on how to provide supervision specifically in the classroom, but then also, how you're helping the learning in regards to our teachers, not with our students. Obviously, there's a great effect with that where it kind of trickles down to the students. But I just would love for you just to, give an overarching viewpoint as far as that learning-focused supervision.
Sure, happily. And I think it's more than trickle down. Just, there's a very deep research base that says that teacher skill equals student growth. And what we believe right behind that, again, with some pretty good research, is that supervision skill equals teacher growth. So a skillful supervisor, from our perspective, is one who has conversations that really go beyond the human resource. I'm going to check the box and do my 3 times a year or whatever your system requires, observation, that I'm going to make the opportunity for us to talk together something that's meaningful, something that's growth promoting. And embedded in learning-focused supervision, in fact, are 4 critical qualities. Learning-focused supervision is developmental. And so we use the notion of growth agent, and I'll say more about that in a little bit. And it's never remedial. It's never a fix-it. It's always an aspiration. Wherever you are, there's room to grow. We want to name that. We want to engage with that. The supervisor wants to support you in that. So it's always about goal setting, and not just goals that you can meet, but goals that will stretch. So it's developmental. At the same time, it's standards driven. Any system that's driven by standards, and I think pretty much nationally, there are standards of different kinds, learning standards and teaching standards. So the standard holds as, this is what we aspire to, this is what we need to agree on, this is what we need to clarify. Sometimes the supervisory process is as simple as clarifying the expectation. And so in most cases, in most systems, there are not just standards, but those standards are organized around rubrics. Those standards are sort of gradated to, boy, you're never going to get to do this, to you're amazing, or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes we call it burlap to satin, with corduroy in between. But whatever the gradient is, it is to look at that, to clarify that. And then the third quality is database, to use data. And we're really talking about low inference data, to use data to substantiate the conversation and the potential assessment. And so those conversations are also customized because one size doesn't fit all. We use structure. What we say is structure maximizes productivity in a minimum amount of time. So we definitely recommend and advocate for structured conversations, but those conversations are still customized about who's making the decisions, who's doing the assessment, who is solving the problems or setting the goals, and so on. So that supervision potentially becomes not just the person who's supervising saying, here's how you did, I'm going to score you, but it becomes a self-assessing kind of a endeavor, that I could look at data and I can look at specific standards, and I should be able to make some reasonable assessment about how I'm doing. I don't need somebody else to tell me how I'm doing. I understand that the human resource piece of an organization says, yes, keeping the public trust, we need to say that we are making sure that we've got quality control here. But the truth is that I should really, just as students should be able to, with a rubric and a piece of writing, a teacher should be able to look at a standard, look at quality data, and make some sense of how they're doing. And then the real learning begins. The conversation is then about, well, then how do you meet those goals? How do you move beyond where you are for constant and continuous improvement? So that's kind of the notion. I guess you would call it supervision beyond compliance.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I want to dive in a lot further on very specific things you said. One of the terms that you used was growth agent, and I absolutely love that term. And I would love for you just to define a little bit more and kind of how you see this as a leadership role.
Sure. We say several things, certainly, but a growth agent, the biggest goal for a growth agent is to increase capacity while decreasing dependency. So, and again, those are concurrent. So if somebody comes to, a teacher will come and say, I'm having a problem with this. It's very easy and almost like a habit. It's natural for the supervisor to say, I can tell you how to fix this, or this is what you need to do. But then what that does, it may in the moment feel really satisfying. You know, both people leave smiling, teacher has something to do, supervisor feels they've fulfilled their role, except that it doesn't require any more thinking on the part of the practitioner, because advice backfires. The practitioner can come and say, great, that really worked. Now what do I need to do about this next thing? So you've increased dependency rather than decreased it. And I can say, well, you know, that idea you gave me, it really didn't work. So what we're doing is we're reducing the important notion of taking responsibility. It's very easy to say what you told me doesn't work. So, so the growth agent, again, I can't say it enough, increasing capacity, decreasing dependency. And anytime, what we always advise is that the supervisor would ask themselves, what am I doing now toward that goal? So if I fix a problem, and we're not suggesting don't fix problems. There are times that a Band-Aid is good, and then come back to it and say, okay, let's talk more about this. So it's not, I'm going to leave you to dry and you need to figure it out. It's making choices. It's recognizing, I guess, the difference between habit and choice.
All right, that was powerful. Okay, so I want to go even deeper. You had used the term structured conversations, but you also were very convincing in regards to making sure that it was built for that individual person, that it's not cookie cutter, if you will.
Right.
So I want to know, for our aspiring current leaders, if they haven't thought of conversations in this structured model that you're speaking of, what does that even look like? How do people go about this? Because I do agree with what you're saying. I just want you to go a little bit deeper in it for those who may not have this in their tool belt.
Sure. And I'm really glad you asked me that question, except there's a whole bunch of ways to respond. So let me begin with the first piece of customization is where the information's coming from. We have embedded in our work something we call a continuum of learning-focused interaction. And the continuum has 4 stances. If on one end, it's very supervisory driven. And on the other end, it's very teacher driven. And there is the idea, part of the supervisory skill is to be able to navigate fluently. So you're not sitting in one stance the entire time, but you'll often move to, there needs to be a little more information in this. So I want to offer an idea, or I want to offer a perspective, or I want to offer a solution even, fine. But again, the distinction between habit and choice. So as a supervisor, I would start with asking a question. What are you noticing about these data? What's the most exciting thing happening in your classroom? What are the things that you really are more problematic for you? So in some way, you enter the conversation with an inquiry. So you really know where to start. And then, depending on the answer, you might stay there. You might say, so we're working on, as a staff, we're working on guided reading. And that's our walkthrough focus this month. And so in our one-to-one conversation, let's talk about that. What's going on in guided reading in your classroom? So the teacher might say, you know what, I'm not entirely sure, or give an answer perhaps that the supervisor thinks it's not substantive. It seems like maybe there's more there that needs to happen, or more understanding that needs to be illuminated. And so they might shift to a place in the continuum where they say, well, let's make sure we're on the same page with what guided reading is. And they would clarify the standards for guided reading. But then they wouldn't leave it there. The really critical thing is that for any piece of information you offer, it needs to be processed. It's true in classrooms and it's true in adult learning. We think of it as sort of a bite chew notion. So if I say, so here are 3 criteria for an effective guided reading lesson, then I want to ask a process question. I want to shift stance to the more teacher-directed end, and maybe I'll collaborate. And so we'll collaborate and I'll say, so let's generate some specific examples in your classroom of how you're meeting those criteria. So this way, the teacher is engaged, involved, participatory. The expectation is set that the message is, it's not a sit and get conversation. You're a part of it, but I'm also in it with you. So I probably left out a fundamental thing. So across that continuum, the 4 stances are calibrating, which is clarifying the standard, clarifying the expectation. And that is very supervisor driven. It's necessary sometimes, it's less necessary sometimes. Moving to consultation, which is an opportunity for the supervisor to offer an idea, a perspective, a suggestion, a solution, a goal, whatever. It's coming right from them with the personal pronoun, I think that. Moving on to what we call collaboration, which is let's, us, we, and it's usually question driven. Let's generate some pros and cons about that suggestion. So in consulting, I say, I think this would be a good idea. Try this. And then I would say, so given that, what's your hunch about how that would work for you? Or let's generate some pros and cons about that. Or I would offer a menu of choice in consultation and then discuss with the teacher. So notice, and then on the very far end, the most teacher-directed end is inquiry. I'm asking open-ended questions based on the teacher's experience and knowledge, which also is a piece of the customization, because you're going to have very experienced teachers and you're going to have newbies, deer in the headlight, brand new teachers, especially right now when we, again, are experiencing teacher shortages. You even customize those questions, not to water them down, but to make them developmentally appropriate. So again, within the conversation, there's a fluency about the information flow. And so you might have a conversation that's 100% from a coaching or inquiry stance,
Yep.
but you would never have a conversation that's 100% from a calibrating or consulting stance, because anytime information gets into the middle, an inquiry or collaborative exchange is required to process it. Otherwise, the information just goes, and it's important that it's integrated, that it's applicable, that it's understood.
Anyone that's been in leadership for any sort of time, you understand how important communication is and making sure that you're delivering it in the right way. And so, talking about growth and how to do that through structure, I just absolutely love that, Laura. Laura, I'm going to take a moment to mention just real quick Magic Mind. I've been drinking this as I've been talking with you, and I'm already feeling the effects as it's sharpening my mind, lowering my stress, and giving me some energy. All things that happen when you also talk to Laura. So very excited about this. I've been going around the country, kicking off with keynotes and talking about mental health, talking about how we need to have healthy habits. And of course, Magic Mind falls right in line with that because, in that conversation, in that presentation, I talk about how we need to take care of ourselves because no one else is going to take care of us outside of that. So as leaders, it's very, very hard to make sure that we are not just putting out fires all the time. We also need to take a moment to, recharge ourselves and do what's best. And so I am going to say, once again, that Magic Mind is doing that. And that's a huge piece. I'm going to put on, for those who are watching on YouTube, the link here. So it's magicmind.com/aspire-to-lead. If you put in the code aspire-to-lead 20, you get 20% off any of your orders. Obviously, I have a subscription and I get that monthly. Love it because it comes right to my door. I can end the subscription at any point, and then they give a money back guarantee. Not that I think you need it, but it is amazing as far as a company goes, as far as just a boost of energy, a shot that's easy to take, and highly recommend it. All right, Laura, I want to come back to something that you had touched on, which is maybe for some people a dirty word, data. So
Okay.
I want to know, with kind of this overarching theme that we have as far as supervision and being a leader, supporting our teachers, what does the use of data look like in the role of leadership?
Well, you're right. And some people say data, some people say data. It depends where
Sure.
you're from.
Yes.
Nevertheless,
Maybe I'm showing my region right now.
right, exactly. I also mentioned low inference data. So we're talking about what we call a third point. We're talking about information that's outside of the relationship that is designed to explore. It's actually, data is really a catalyst. Data is not the be all end all. I think that in many supervisory models, the supervisor diligently goes into a classroom and script tapes or records or captures, every movement and every moment in that classroom, maybe even video. So we're really talking about data that's low inference. The difference between a supervisor note that says at 9:02 the teacher reviewed the homework and a supervisor note that says at 9:02 students were placed in pairs, were directed to ask each other a question about the homework. So one is much vaguer and the room for inference is there, whereas the other is much more specific and concrete. So we're assuming low inference data, first of all, and lots of it, different kinds. So you want to triangulate also. It's not uncommon, I think, and those of you out there have had this experience, if you're experienced leaders and supervisors, that you say, well, this happened and this assessment indicates this about this kid or this class. And the teacher disagrees and says, no, I really don't think that's true. The item was bad, the day was wonky, whatever. It's very fair to say, okay, well then, what does indicate? Like, what do we need to know? So it's not just one piece of information that we agree with or we don't agree with. We also need multiple sources to determine accuracy or likelihood or correctness. So there's that. There's just the use of data in general. I wish I had your magic mind. I'm going to do this.
Magic mind is amazing.
Yeah. Throw some across the cyberspace.
I always say I wish I was in person because I would just hand it over.
Yeah.
Most of my guests want it right now.
So it's also that the data are only as good as the conversation around them.
Yep.
What we're really looking for is to create self-directed learners in teachers, that they can take data, that data becomes a useful information source to determine gaps and gains, not to judge. It's important to be more curious than judgmental. So I look at data and it doesn't make sense to me, or I don't feel like it's really resonating with my experience of what happened. I want to wonder why instead of, just judging. So what's your hunch about what might be causing this is a very powerful structured conversation question. Let's look at that. What percentage of kids seem to be able to get this objective and what percent are not? And then let's look at either group. So what's happening for the ones that got it that we can go after and do more of, or what's happening for the ones that haven't, and what can we do to help scaffold for them? So again, data are only as useful as the conversation around them and the ways in which they honestly can reflect a gradient on a previously agreed upon standard.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
For any of the topics that we've touched on today, if you have any questions, obviously the website is there. We're going to talk about, how to also get into contact with Laura. So if you are looking, for her LLC to support you also, we would love for you to do that. But Laura, I want to just real quick touch on something that I actually have my hands on right now,
right.
Groups at Work, one of many of your brilliant books. And, with your co-author, Bruce Wellman, will you share a little bit about this wonderful resource?
Sure. Groups at Work is a strategy book. There's 72 strategies for leaders that see themselves as group developers. So, again, what I said earlier was we often find that staff meetings or other kinds of committee team meetings are kind of the oral memo. We get people together and we say, we've sent them an email or a memo about, what all the information they need, and then we just essentially go over it in a meeting, and that's a meeting. Our notion is that you really can be more respectful of adult professional time and make more gains in terms of creating a collaborative culture when you use meetings for interaction, when you use meetings to process information, not just receive it. And so Groups at Work is a strategy book for 6 different categories of information processing that tend to be the most common: goal setting, problem solving, decision making, like that. It's very, very practical, I would say. Can I also hold up a book that you don't have that we just talked about?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Okay, whoops. That's not the one. So.
Well, actually, Laura, before you do that, I want to go through it. I just want to say, you were talking about being very practical, and I would say 100%. You've got the purpose, the intention, tips, variations. Yes. I mean, you give an example. I mean, it is also
downloadable resources too on our website. So, because busy leaders don't need to make their own PowerPoint slides. So
thank you.
So yes. So there is that. And then the book that we really were talking about is this one. Mm-hmm. And this has the specifics on structured conversations, the 4 different elements in the model, the continuum of learning-focused interaction, and so on. So
for those who are listening on your podcast platforms, it's Learning-Focused Supervision. And then I was holding up Groups at Work. I will have the links, obviously, in the show notes, and of course at joshemper.com for you to make sure that you pick up these resources. Laura, I want to also talk about just some upcoming projects and writing that you're doing, because as we have already said, you have quite a few books out there in the world. What is your passion right now? What are you writing about? And are there any writing projects that are coming up?
Yeah, in fact, there's a real focus for me right now on efficacy, self-efficacy and collective efficacy. And I know that's kind of a bit of a buzzword, but the idea that students have voice, that students have agency. How do we empower them? How do we empower the adults in our school so that the culture of the school is one of collective efficacy, that we trust each other, that we can rely on each other, that we have a very strong belief that we can get this thing done. We can overcome any hurdles or learning problems or issues or obstacles, I guess. So efficacy has been kind of the watchword. I'm paying attention to it, reading more about it. And right now I'm also writing a chapter with my husband. It's called Thinking Makes It So, always a colon. Thinking Makes It So, Efficacy as a Social Cognitive Phenomena. I know that sounds very like a lot of words, but really it is about how do you understand there's an I rebound in any group, and how do you get kids to be able to advocate for themselves when they feel overwhelmed? How do you get them to do it in a way that's healthy and not assertive or aggressive? That's what we're working on right now and having fun learning with. If it's not fun, why do it?
Seriously. And how cool is it you get to write with your husband?
I know. Yeah, he's a psychologist, so it's great.
Love that collaboration. Okay. So Laura, I hope everyone is taking notes and really gaining from the wisdom that you provide today, but I also want them to walk away with an actionable item. So for our aspiring and current leaders, if they can do something tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend them do?
Whoa. Okay.
I know. Big question.
I think it's more about their internal dialogue, their internal conversation than something they might do.
Sure.
So I think it's about learning and growth begin with you as a leader. So you need to really be vulnerable, be willing to take a risk, be open to communication and feedback from your staff. Ask, in fact, for it. Experiment, make them partners and collaborators. So your next staff meeting, here's an actionable thing. Your next staff meeting, if it's a 30-minute meeting, have at least one 10-minute interactive engagement where you ask people to talk with someone maybe that they don't normally talk with, maybe a stand and share about something that's nice and juicy that's happening at your building. So something relevant to your building or your district that they can ask each other questions about, or come up with some ideas about, or brainstorm some visions about, whatever is obviously topical, but that they're doing it together in pairs, in quartets. So you go ahead and try that. And sometimes I know it's hard to even ask people, people's seats are sort of carved to their anatomy in a staff meeting. Everybody sits where they always sat. So even that, take that risk, ask people to get up, tell them why you're asking, and stretch and talk. I would definitely try that.
No, I love it so much. And you're right. There is such a protocol and just this traditional model of staff meetings and roles and responsibilities. So yeah, mix it up. I love it. Laura, I had mentioned earlier about folks reaching out to you and connecting if they have any questions or if they want your support on their campus or at their district. So how may they get a hold of you?
They can go to our website. I think you're going to post that. It's www.miravia.education. And we'd be delighted to hear from you. There's a ton of free resources there. You sign in and there's all kinds of downloadables and information and exercises. And then certainly I have 4 associates who are just brilliant people. And so they would be happy to come and work with you or answer any questions that you might have. Awesome. It's about the kids and it's about making learning continuous and, and better.
So cool. All right. So make sure you're heading over to the websites. 1, getting the resources, and then 2, connecting with Laura and her associates as they just do phenomenal work. So, Laura, with that, I just appreciate you so much. And I know it's kind of a busy time for us all as school is kicking off, but I've enjoyed our conversation so much just, over the small time and would love to connect in the future. But not only thank you for being on the podcast, but thank you so much for supporting so many educators all across this country.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, you take care. Have a great launch of the school year. And I appreciate being invited.